Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a great episode for you. First, before we get into it all, if you were watching this video on YouTube, please like the video. It really helps us out, helps other Canadians discover our channel, and helps it reach further. If you're watching on X, we're broadcasting live on X these days. Don't forget to give that video a share to help us out. And finally, if you're listening to this podcast and you are enjoying it, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Again, it really helps us out. I want to talk about Justin Trudeau. I want to talk about the gall of this man who announced back in early January that he was resigning. He said he was resigning, he was stepping down, he wasn't going to lead us anymore. And now he just won't go away. He inserts himself in the discussion with President Donald Trump. We know that the reason, at least part of the reason, why Donald Trump is being so aggressive towards Canada is because he doesn't like our prime minister. He doesn't like Justin Trudeau. Well, here we are in the final days of Justin Trudeau's time as prime minister. And what does he do? He announces an unbelievably large infrastructure project, which I promise you will go insanely over budget if it ever gets completed. We're going to get into all of that. I also want to talk about an incredible story that was broken by our friends over at True North, and you can find the story on Juno News about the gold heist suspects, the people who are presumed to have carried out that gold heist that happened in Pearson Airport. They're not only still at large, they're not even in Canada. There's evidence now that suggests that they're just sort of living large in places like Dubai and India. So we're going to talk about all of that. But to start off the show today, folks, I want to bring in a person who I have tremendous respect for, Professor David Millard Haskell, who's an associate professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. Prior to being a professor, he was actually in our realm. He was a journalist, and he had a successful career working in the media for TVO and several other radio stations and television stations. And he is also a current senior fellow, research fellow over at the Aristotle Foundation. So, David, thank you so much for joining the program today.
It's a pleasure.
So I saw one of the piece that you had recently written with great interest over on an outlet called The American Conservative. You have a piece called "Invite Canada's Conservatives to Join America." So I'm going to get you to walk us through this proposal. Before, just for the audience, let's show a clip of President Trump making an offer about a united North America.
Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
So a lot of Canadians see that and hear that and feel terrified.
Right.
Others, though, I think that there's a significant percentage. I don't know if it's 10% or a quarter. It's up to 50% of especially young men that hear that and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that we might have a better future if we're all one big united country. Very counter to what the elites and legacy media and politicians basically of all stripes, it seems. But I found your piece interesting because you kind of get into some of the details of why Americans might not want Canadians, right? Why they might not want to absorb us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you wrote?
Well, what I do, Candice, is I look at 3 options that the Trump administration may want to consider. And the first thing I talk about is that they probably wouldn't want all of Canada. And I move in that direction, saying that if you look at Canada itself, we lean politically to the left. And if the Trump administration were really trying to bolster conservatism in the US, the worst thing they could do would be to bring all Canada on board. So currently we're at about 41 million people. And if this left-leaning country, which Canada is, of 41 million people, came in holus bolus into the US, that'd be like the equivalent of the state of California. So what they'd see is about 45 to 48 new representatives in the lower house of Congress, and then in the Senate, 2 more there. And it would decidedly tip the scales toward really radical leftist ideology in the US. And Trump wouldn't want that. I mean, could you imagine? They've just secured what we'd call a mega base. They've really got a mega foundation, and it would be upended by absorbing all of Canada. So I kind of poo-poo that idea. And they must be aware of that, right? They must be. But we also see that there seems to be a special relationship between Daniel Smith and also President Trump. I mean, she went down to Mar-a-Lago and she was chatting with him. We don't know what was actually said, but she's holding her cards very close to the chest. She's not saying anything about going alone or anything like that. But I make that suggestion in my piece. I say, from a strategic point of view, Trump might want to consider making an overture to the province of Alberta. And I look at it like this. First of all, they already do a lot of trading in terms of natural gas and oil, right? Like 80% of Alberta's natural gas and oil goes to the US anyway. If Alberta were able to be that 51st state as opposed to all Canada, there'd be some significant benefits economically there. There'd be no trade barriers there. In addition, people in Alberta, I mean, even 65% are really solidly conservative. So again, that would benefit President Trump. He's going to get people in who are already aligned with him ideologically. From the point of view of people in Alberta, we know that they're dissatisfied with the arrangement as it applies to equalization payments, for example. I mean, almost to the tune of a couple billion every year. And most of that goes to provinces. Well, most of it goes to Quebec, who doesn't even want pipelines, right? It must be so frustrating for people in Alberta to see the money that is raised from their natural resources primarily go to a province that is trying to ruin them financially. So, I mean, we know that within the province already, there's a real separatist sentiment.
Whoops, did we lose you there, David? You're frozen on my end. Maybe it's me though. But we will try our best, folks, to get David back on. What he was talking about kind of reminds me a little bit of what Jordan Peterson said. Jordan Peterson had a recent piece in the National Post where he basically just says, look, Canada has to offer a better deal to Alberta than what Donald Trump is offering, because Donald Trump, love him or hate him, he is making an offer to the Canadians that does appeal to many Canadians. Not all of them, not even a majority. Like I said, it depends on what poll you're looking at, anywhere between 10% to 15% of the country. But it is interesting to even just think about like the demographics of the people. I watched a Rebel video yesterday where the journalist was walking around Calgary asking people what they thought about it. And downtown Calgary, I think he was on Stevens Avenue, it seemed like almost everyone he was talking to was for the idea. Interesting. I was talking to some family friends in the GTA, talking to people who are first generation Canadians, immigrants. And they basically said everyone in their social circle likes the idea. They think, why not? Why not join the Americans? They are a more prosperous country, a richer country, lower taxes. If you take patriotism and love of country out of the equation and you just look at it in terms of what's the best for like my finances and my family, it's hard to argue that Canada might not be better off with this offer, and particularly Alberta, because as David was saying there, they haven't been treated very fairly, very nicely in this confederation, in our Canadian Union. The idea that they get taxed and the equalization system means that money from Alberta, excess money, gets sent to other parts of the country, poor parts of the country, places like Quebec and the Maritimes, where they don't have the same attitude towards resource development, towards pro-capitalism. They lean more towards big government and socialism. So they get to waste the money and spend them on big projects and big government. And Alberta's the one paying the bill. So it's such an interesting topic of conversation, and we're still working to see if we can get David back on the line. But I want to talk a little bit about, just when it comes to Canada-U.S. relations. The ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, said that that Canada's making progress. So in an interview with CBC's Power and Politics, the Canadian ambassador to the US, a woman named Kristen Hillman, said that the president, US president, is pleased with Canada's progress, pleased with the things that Justin Trudeau has done to try to protect the border, to try to crack down on fentanyl. Maybe appointing that fentanyl czar was a step in the right direction. So here is a clip from Wednesday.
The president was pleased with the announcements we made, but not only the announcements, the progress that we are making in the fight against fentanyl, in the fight against irregular migration, illegal migration. For example, illegal migration from Canada to the United States is down 90% in recent months. And we have taken important measures with respect to the fight against fentanyl.
And that's not all she said. She also added that everybody that she is talking to in Washington believes that Trump's March 4th deadline for the 25% tariffs on Canada is tied to this effort. And so she believes that they are taking steps in the right direction. Maybe we will avoid a trade war after all. Let's play that clip.
Everybody that we are talking to are saying that the March 4th deadline is tied to continued efforts on our part and together with them to fight, in particular, the scourge of fentanyl.
So are you getting signals then that we might get a reprieve because we've had some success already at the border with fentanyl?
So I'm getting signals that the work that we are doing and the results that we are achieving is well received.
So on the one hand, we have the Trudeau administration, Trudeau government officials, including the ambassador there, saying we're taking efforts, we're working with the Trump administration, they're happy with our progress, we're doing the things that they want on the way to hopefully avoiding a trade war. But then on the other hand, the Trudeau Liberals, they just can't resist, right? They can't help but trying to demonize Donald Trump, trying to undermine him, using him as a political wedge in Canada. Because in Canada, we all know Trump isn't very popular, especially in the center. Centrist Canadians, normal Canadians don't really like his style, don't like Trump. And so it's a perfect wedge issue for the Liberals. All they have to do is compare conservatives in Canada to Trump, and that'll sufficiently scare centrist voters enough to want to abandon the Conservatives. So, despite all the progress that they're supposedly making in negotiating, the Liberals released an attack ad framing Pierre Poilievre in negative light and comparing him to Donald Trump. Let's play that clip.
Everything is broken.
Everything is broken. Fake news.
Fake news.
The left-wing censorship regime.
Their woke censorship ideology.
Defeating the radical left.
Radical, leftist, authoritarian.
We want those great Canadian truckers to know that we are with them all the way.
I'm proud of the truckers and I stand with them.
Have turned our once great cities into cesspools of bloodshed and crime.
Unleashed a crime wave like we have never seen.
So they can't help it. They want to demonize Trump even at a moment when they're trying to negotiate with him. This is a problem in Canada, right? It's like there's so much of an incentive for the Liberals to have a trade war. The more that we're involved in a trade war, the more that they're telling the sort of center and normal Canadians to wrap themselves in the flag, be proud of Canadian, buy Canadian, anti-Americanism is on the rise. That sentiment is actually good politically for the Liberals. So it seems like they would almost rather sacrifice the country and have a trade war rather than have mutual prosperity for all, but have a potential conservative government back. I think we have David Haskell back on the line, and if we do, we can continue that conversation. David, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic. We had to go by phone. I think that we've just seen, Candice, that somebody doesn't want this conversation to happen. I think that it could be Trudeau trying to tamper with some of this stuff.
I wouldn't put it past them.
Pardon?
I said I wouldn't put it past them. We know that they love censorship. And actually, I covered this on the show yesterday, watching the sort of censorship regime that's happening in Europe, right? The way that they crack down on, there was a 60 Minutes piece highlighting this idea that there's a police force in Germany that goes and raids your house and takes away your laptop and your phone if you post things that they deem to be insulting or racist online. It seemed like maybe a possible preview. I'm sure that Justin Trudeau and his Liberals would love to have powers like that. But let's go back to your piece, David, because when you're off the line, I said, Jordan Peterson had a piece in the National Post saying that Canada has to offer something better for Alberta, because what Trump is offering could be appealing to a lot of Albertans. And maybe it's time that Canada realizes that, wakes up and says, wow, we're really taking advantage of a certain part of the country. What did you think of that?
Yeah, well, I was in agreement with Jordan on that. One of the things that hasn't come up, and this is very Machiavellian, but I mean, all politics is Machiavellian. One of the things that I've wondered about is, why would the people surrounding Danielle Smith not say, shouldn't we be at least pretend that we're interested in this offer from Trump, or shouldn't we do a little bit of back channel to see what might be out there? And the reason I say that is, we know from history since the 1960s, the province of Quebec, the government of Quebec, has been able to wrestle incredible additional rights and privileges from the Canadian Federation simply by saber rattling related to separation. And so I get it, and I think it's noble and honorable that Alberta has not really gone that route. But if you've got the world superpower on one knee holding a ring, maybe you can get a pretty nice proposal from the other suitor. So and again, this is Machiavellian, of course, but all politics is. And I wonder why the Alberta government hasn't at least, or maybe they are. They really should, I think, examine their options. And I only say this, listen, I'm not from Alberta. I'm an Ontario guy. And so I'm looking at this strictly from a political strategic point of view. There are immense benefits that could come to Alberta were it to become the 51st state. And I mean, even Trump has mentioned that it'd be about a 60% reduction in taxes off the top. They'd also not have to do equalization payments. In the United States, the way that the states divvy things up, it's a much smaller pot. There is a sort of a collective pot that comes from state to state that they try to equal out the disadvantages in other states that are more poor, like Alabama, Missouri. But it's nothing like we have in the equalization payments. And those equalization payments, really, there's no motivation. We haven't heard any kind of motivation from any of the party leaders at the top, well, whether it's Poilievre or Trudeau, to ever adjust these things. So it seems like same old for people in Alberta. So again, there are some things that I'm interested in. Are they happening in terms of back channel with Alberta? Certainly, there are avenues to explore there. We were talking earlier. I said that all Canada, probably it'd be a bad idea for Trump to absorb all Canada. In my piece, Invite Conservatives to Become Americans, that appears in the American Conservative magazine. The second thing I talked about was Alberta. Maybe we want to talk about that third option that I also mentioned in the piece. We haven't gone there yet, if that's all right with you, Candice.
Well, before we do, I want to just raise this concern, because I think when Donald Trump first mentioned the 51st state, I'm thoroughly convinced it was a joke. He was talking about how Wayne Gretzky should be the governor, and basically kind of trying to troll our prime minister. You could tell that they have a tense relationship, let's put it that way. Right. And then it seemed like the more that he said it out loud and the more reaction he got, he kind of leaned into it. Like, I don't know that he's literal. I don't know that he is. I think that he's serious about having a better deal. He doesn't understand why Canada doesn't have a proper military, why, there's so much protection that happens from the American perspective. For me, it makes sense, because, why would we rebuild our own military when they have one right there? We should probably work more closely with them. We should follow their guidance in terms of securing our border and fixing our broken immigration system and cracking down. But I didn't think that he was literal, because of some of the questions that you raised. Like, I don't think that any right-minded Republican president would want to invite 40 million potentially left-wing Democrats into the country. I don't think that they would want to have 2 more Democratic senators, which Canada would pretty much always have. And so, when you get into the kind of like real nitty-gritty of it, a political union, it doesn't make sense for the Americans. I think that Canadians are too, our entire country was built on the idea that we're not Americans, that we wanted to stop, we wanted to remain loyal to the crown and not participate in the revolution. So it seems like it seems like a hard fit to make this a political union. And so I think the pieces, the issues that you raise in your piece are correct. But then that leads to the question for you, David. Do you think Trump is literal? Do you think that he literally wants to absorb Canada, invade, or, create this union in a literal way?
No. And you've hit all the main points that I would raise, Candice. Definitely, he did start out and he was trolling. He was joking around. But I think that it caught some wind in that sail, and he thought, wait a minute, there's some. Okay, he said, I don't want to buy the farm, but I wouldn't mind rustling a few of the cattle. And in his Art of the Deal, I mean, this is the guy who wrote a book all about negotiation, and he basically says, say crazy things at the start, and see, it's sort of like shake the tree and see which apples drop. And so he was probably looking for the reaction, and he's gotten some reaction. And that's his negotiation strategy. And we did see him move back a little bit when he instituted the tariffs in February. And then he said, well, I've seen some action on your border, that you're trying to secure your border. You're trying to take care of the fentanyl problem. And so he said, let's move that deadline. So we know that he is looking for some very specific things as well. But to your point, yeah, he's testing the waters. He's putting something up the flagpole, see who salutes. He's really, I don't think he had a great game plan, but then we look at his speech that he gave in January, his inauguration speech. He made a point of saying, we are going to expand as a nation. Now, would that have been in there if there hadn't been some kind of buzz happening around his 51st state comments, around his Panama comments, around his Greenland comments? And he was getting some positive feedback on Greenland. Politically in the US, his comments about Panama were well received. In Canada, we didn't receive his idea of the 51st state generally as well. But there were probably people around him saying, see what happens, see what apples fall. But all this is to say that in his inauguration address, he actually makes a point of saying, we are an expanding nation again. So that to me signals something.
I tend to agree. I think that, I think it's pretty obvious that Justin Trudeau has done tremendous damage to our country, and not just our country, like our society, our culture. It feels fractured. It doesn't feel like we're bound by unity or a shared sense of belief in our country. Everything from the economics to the immigration to national unity. Like, I don't think that there's a flaring Quebec separatist movement, and the Alberta or Western separatist movement has just gotten stronger over the last 10 years. Like, our country's broken. We can't build a pipeline. We can't build infrastructure projects. Trudeau, on his way out the door, is promising a multi-billion-dollar train, which I predict will never get built. But now would be the time, from the outside anyway. It seems like America is pretty united around Donald Trump. They're pretty excited. He's promising a golden age. And even, people in tech in the Silicon Valley who are notoriously left-wing and Democrat, even a fraction of those people are excited. You see people across the country kind of leaning into their excitement over this fresh start that they're having in the United States. And then meanwhile, in Canada, we have this sad, broken system where we're about to have a prime minister basically installed from the World Economic Forum to be like a bankruptcy trustee here. And, now would be the time. And I do think that outside of the political bubble of everyone in all the parties kind of agrees that you have to double down on Canada. If you talk to normal people, and I mentioned this, people who aren't hyper political, I think the idea of joining the U.S. might actually seem appealing because they are, lower taxes, freer economy, more choice, more, options in terms of where to live, and, everything from like cell phone companies to airlines. Like, there's just a lot more choice in the United States. So it's like, what are we holding on to? And particularly, I worry about new Canadians, people who have first generation, who haven't grown up being Canadian or don't have a Canadian bloodline, that they have even less of an attachment to this country.
Right. Well, you've mentioned something that's, I think, pretty important, and it's the reasons. What are the reasons that someone would favor Canada? What is it that we talk? Polyev has been talking about Canada being broken. So I think that there's something in that Canada is broken, but there's a part of it that can't be fixed. And I think that there are people, normal people, you call them normal people, who are looking at the things that can't be fixed in Canada. And then they're saying, maybe, given that it can't be fixed, maybe we do have to look at this other option. And so the thing that can't be fixed is our Constitution. And I mentioned this in my piece. I say that people, particularly those what we'll call the hardcore conservatives who have been in the freedom movement. So those people are the people who were objecting to the COVID mandates. These are the people who are appearing before their school boards and are talking about radical gender ideology. These are the people who are doing public protests related to any number of radical leftist ideologies. So they've got skin in the game, right? We'll call them the freedom movement. Well, those people have noticed that our Constitution doesn't support them. Our Constitution is broken. So our Constitution, part one of our Constitution, is our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. A lot of people don't understand that our Constitution is two parts. It was adopted in 1982, and the first part is the Charter. And the Charter says what your rights are supposed to be and how they're supposed to be given to you. Well, our Charter is rigged. I say rigged, meaning it is against freedom. It is for identity politics, and is actually against the promotion of Western culture, and it's written right into it. And if you are someone in the freedom movement, if you are a true conservative who has skin in the game and you've been speaking out against these things, you've seen that. You've seen that the very rules of the game, the things that actually the rule book, the guidebook for our country, is written in such a way that you cannot win. And I'll get very specific about this. So Section 1 of our Charter says, well, Section 2, first of all, Section 2 gives you the rights. It says you have the right to freedom of religion. You have the right to assembly, the right to freedom of expression. That all sounds really good. But Section 1 of our Charter says that every one of those rights can be taken away if it's justified in a free and democratic society. And you think, okay, well, as long as it's justified in a free and democratic society, well, what we've seen is that most of our judges have been appointed by the liberals. And those liberal judges have suggested that what's justified, it sure looks more like it would be justified in a communist country than a democratic country. And I can give you some examples. We could look at during the COVID mandates, big box stores, Walmart was allowed to be open, Home Depot was allowed to be open. But conservative Christian churches who wanted to stay open, when they went to court, they were told, sorry, your right to freedom of assembly, your right to freedom of religion, it has no standing. Because we judges are saying that in a free and democratic society, the quashing of your rights is justified. We could go a little bit in the past. We could look at the decision for the Trinity Western Law School. So Trinity Western University is a Christian university. They wanted to launch a law school. But the law societies of British Columbia and Ontario said, no, that law school will actually make people unsafe. It will make society unsafe because it's going to insist upon Christian values. They made that argument. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, we agree with the law societies. And therefore, the Christians, the conservative Christians at Trinity Western were told, you can't have a law school. if we go back to really the beginning of when the charter was used in order to suppress the rights of conservatives, we could look at a case of a Christian printer in Toronto, Scott Brocky, who wanted to, he wanted to refuse a client. He said, my Christian values do not allow me to print what you want me to print. He even said, you can go somewhere else. Well, the client took him to court, and the court said, sorry, you don't have the right to your Christian values in your business. And they based it on section 1 of the charter that said we can pull any of these rights that are shown in section 2 as long as we can justify it in a free and democratic society. So for someone who is a true conservative, someone with skin in the game, and they're in Canada, they'll look across the border to the United States, where their Bill of Rights talks about inalienable rights. Their Constitution talks about inalienable rights. And we've seen in case after case, they're actually upheld.
Right. Well,
Wow.
it's interesting, David, because I think there's a long argument on the conservative side of the spectrum of like who has the better system. And I think many people, even conservative Canadians, at one point argued that Canada Canada, the reason that we didn't join the American Revolution is because we were too conservative. We didn't want that kind of change. We believed in, steady, stable power and governance, and the idea of a monarchy. We would never design this kind of government from scratch, but we have it, and it seems to work in some way. I don't hear conservatives making that argument. I think you're right that post-COVID, post some of these decisions that have happened, it's impossible to argue that our system upholds freedom better than the American. I think the American system is full of flaws as well. But just to bring it back to the piece that you wrote, I wonder, if Donald Trump were to read this piece and say, yeah, that's a great idea, why don't we just invite all of the conservatives or all of the Albertans to join America? What would be left in Canada? I mean, I think that it would be a pretty scary place to live if the kind of, the people who were committed to freedom, the people who were the small business owners and the people with Christian values and family values got up and left. I would be kind of terrified as to what would be left and what would happen to this country.
I think that you wouldn't see everybody leave. And what you're describing is an Atlas Shrugged moment, right? When we read the book by Rand about who is John Galt, and there's this movement where all the people who are really, in this case, the libertarians, leave society. Society basically crumbles. And I think you might have something there. But of course, many of these people who are what I'd call the true conservatives, they'd stay because they're natural born fighters. They've been fighting from the beginning. They've got skin in the game. They're not going to leave. But let's say if some of them did, and the best estimate for the freedom movement of people with skin in the game, probably a good proxy for that is how many people refuse to get vaccinated, how many people refuse to wear masks, how many people stood up publicly. It's probably about 10% of the population. So you're probably talking about 4 million people. And that's about the size of Oklahoma. So, not a shabby number of people. Could the United States absorb that? Very comfortably, very comfortably. And in my piece, I suggest to the Trump administration, if they'll ever read this piece, that what they could do is actually create almost like a refugee visa. So they've done it for other countries where there's a persecuted class. Well, you could definitely make the case that in Canada, those people who are part of the freedom movement, those people who are truly public in their conservative values, are a persecuted minority. I mean, from job loss to court cases, to any number of public trials that they have to endure, there is an argument to be made there. And if Trump were to say, okay, let's bring those people in, definitely that is a form of expansionism. Now, he was talking about geographic expansion, but what about demographic expansion? You bring in those people who are already very much aligned with what we'd say is the conservative movement in the US, the hardcore conservative movement in the US. That could be a real benefit. Certainly the people in Canada who would be willing to take that up, they'd benefit as well from lower taxes and from being in a place where you're not the odd duck anymore. And by that, even conservatives who are sort of party adherents. They adhere to a party with conservative in their name. If they're a true conservative, they don't fit in. I mean, the elites in their party actually disparage them. They're embarrassed by them. And they certainly don't speak out on the issues that are close to them. And by that, I mean, look at our conservative leaders. Our most populous province is Ontario. Doug Ford is ostensibly the head of the Conservatives in Ontario. And he doesn't talk about cultural issues at all. In fact, he abets what we would see as the most radical of leftist policies in our education system. So we've got that. We've got Poilievre, who I understand. Listen, strategically, from a strategic point of view, if you're in the lead, you say less. Winning, say less. I get it. But man, doesn't he realize that the way that you open that Overton window, the way that you make things permissible for discussion is by discussing them? A leader leads. At some point, you actually have to say the things. And I talk to friends of mine who are deeply embedded in the federal Conservatives, and they say, oh yeah, you should hear what he whispers about. And I'm just tired of the whispering. I think that the reason that in Canada we have so little support for conservative ideas is because our conservative leaders won't talk about them. And so we find ourselves in this catch-22. You actually have to begin talking about things. Things that are relegated to the private sphere will die in the public sphere.
You're right. You know, I listened to Pierre Poilievre's Canada First rally on Saturday night, and we actually did a deep dive on the show yesterday with Barbara Kay. Barbara Kay really liked the speech, and she walked us through it from her perspective. And I agree. I think that if you look at it deeply, you can see a lot of things that would make conservatives happy. But then, you know, on the surface, what you're really seeing is I can be the liberals more than the liberals. Look, I love the flag. I love Canada. I'm going to defend it. Like kind of almost copying what they're focused on, right? Instead of the election being focused on how broken Canada is from Justin Trudeau, it's now focused on who can be the better negotiator with Trump, who can stand up against tariffs better. And it's kind of like playing on their turf. And it's unfortunate that he does that. But I think, well, to be honest, David, that's the reason why we started Juno News. It's the reason I started True North, because I lost faith in our politicians to lead the way. I think that, you know, in a large part, if you look at what's happening in the United States with the resurgence of a conservative movement, it's not just Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is at the front, but there's an entire ecosystem, everything from, you know, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point, getting young, Gen Z, conservatives out in numbers, you know, the Daily Wire, a huge successful media company, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, all of these voices out there pushing the message. Like we can't just rely on a political leader to do it, because at the end of the day, they're going to do what they need to do to get elected. We need kind of all hands on deck and as many people and voices as we can. So with that, I'm going to thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you on the show back, because it's great to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, it was great to be with you, Candice, and apologies for I have no idea what happened technically here, but I'm grateful that I was able to get back, and I've enjoyed our conversation.
Okay. All right. We'll have you back again soon. Thank you so much. That's David Haskell, a professor. And wow, go check out his piece in The American Conservative, because sometimes I wonder if there's any conservative thinkers, Christian people left in Canadian academic halls. And so it's refreshing and nice to find some and hear and know that they're, you know, part of the people that are influencing the younger generation. Okay, folks, I want to get to this announcement yesterday, because this is just so typical of liberals. They love announcing gigantic, aspirational, big goals that, you know, usually they just don't get anywhere. But Justin Trudeau, on his way out the door, you know, we're counting down the days until he will finally leave us alone. I mean, I don't know that the next thing that we're going to get after Justin Trudeau is any better. It looks like Mark Carney is going to be installed and probably go down the same path. But yesterday in Montreal, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announces a 6-year, $3.9 billion plan, officially named ALTO, to build a high-speed rail line connecting Quebec City to Toronto. So here is what that looked like.
Today, I'm announcing the launch of ALTO, the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history. A high-speed rail network between Quebec City and Toronto with stops in Trois-Rivières, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, and Peterborough. It'll span 1,000 kilometers with 100% electric trains that will reach speeds of 300 kilometers an hour.
Sorry, in what world do you announce that you're resigning, and then like 2 days before you leave, you announce the largest infrastructure program in Canadian history? Like, what gives you the power to do that? I get that you're prime minister, you're on your way out, nobody wants you, you were absolutely at the bottom of the polls, the lowest you've ever been. I think you had 16% of Canadians willing to stand behind you. And here you are announcing a huge project. These are the kind of things you announce at the beginning of your tenure so that you can get them done. Justin Trudeau, so typical, announces it at the very end. So here he is saying that Alto will be a pan-Canadian endeavor that will supercharge the entire economy. Don't you love their opinion of pan-Canadian? Pan-Canadian, from Justin Trudeau's perspective, is Quebec City all the way to west to Toronto. So sorry, rest of Canada. Canada ends at Toronto. Here's Justin Trudeau saying that.
Alto will be a truly pan-Canadian endeavor, using expertise and resources from coast to coast to coast. It'll turbocharge our entire economy, create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, and open new opportunities for Canadian businesses at every link of our supply chain.
Again, pan-Canadian, all the way from Toronto to Quebec City. So here is what the train would look like. Here's a map. It would go from Toronto to Peterborough to Ottawa to Montreal, Laval, Trois-Rivières, and finish in Quebec City. So this is pan-Canadian, folks. This, from Justin Trudeau's perspective, that's the whole country. I want to play this clip because this is so telling. So I'm going to play a clip of a Q&A that Justin Trudeau faced at the end of this announcement. You can hear a French reporter, I believe with Radio-Canada, CBC French, asking Prime Minister Justin Trudeau how he will ensure that future governments won't just cancel this, right? Because the idea is like he's literally on his way out the door. His time as prime minister is over, so he can announce this all he wants. It's really up to the next person whether or not they actually want to spend this money. Hello, we're bankrupt. We don't have any money. We are completely over budget. Everyone who is running to replace Justin Trudeau is talking about cutting the government, cutting the budget. Even Mark Carney is out there at least saying that he's going to try to balance the budget. You have to cut to do that because Justin Trudeau has basically doubled Canada's spending. So like, where are you going to get this money? Those aren't the questions that the mainstream media is asking. The mainstream media is asking, oh, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, how will you use the system to make sure that your plan remains in power even though you will no longer be Prime Minister? Let's play that clip. Do we have that clip, Sean?
Will there be any guarantees to make sure that if there's a successor, you will have a successor, if there's a next government, let's say the Conservatives, won't be able, or it won't be easy for them to stop the project?
Listen, this high-speed rail in this country was always going to be a project that would be take long enough to build that it would cover multiple governments at all different orders of government, from municipal to provincial to federal. And it takes a will and a determination by a government to move forward and lock in this progress.
Yeah, so that's called a dictatorship, folks. So the journalist is teeing it up, saying, how will you guarantee that this happens? Justin Trudeau says they're going to put contracts in place, make sure things are signed so that a future government can't get out of it. Yeah, that's not how it's supposed to work. A future government has authority to stop spending money on wasteful projects if they see fit. Justin Trudeau doing everything they can. You know, this reminds me of the high-speed rail project in California, because this is what I predict will happen. I mean, it's already happened, folks. Look, it's been like 20 years since they promised to build a cross-town LRT train line in Toronto, the Eglinton line. That thing has been under construction for over a decade. It's nowhere near being complete. They can't even build a train, an LRT across Toronto, and yet we're supposed to believe that they're going to build one all the way up to Quebec City. So in California, it's the exact same thing that's happening. So back in 2008, California announced and agreed, there was the voters approved to a measure that would put $10 billion towards a high-speed rail project. It was supposed to go from Los Angeles to San Francisco. It was supposed to be complete by 2020. The estimated price tag was about $28 billion up to $35 billion. So just keep in mind, Justin Trudeau says that his plan to build 1,000 kilometers of track will cost us $4 billion. Even back in 2008, California, their train line is only 350 miles. They said it would cost about $35 billion, so 10x more than what Justin Trudeau says. And here we are in 2025, 5 years after the California train was supposed to be completed, and it's nowhere close to being completed. It's nowhere close to being completed. They basically abandoned the idea of doing it. And they've already spent, listen to this, $128 billion in California. And they don't have the train line. They don't have a train line. Here's a little explainer clip talking about what's happened in California.
November 4th, 2008, the people of California voted to fund this: a high-speed rail line. Many countries around the world have had high-speed trains for decades, and this would be the US's attempt to finally catch up. The train would whisk passengers from LA to San Francisco in under 3 hours, and it was all set to open in 2020. Today, it's 2022, and California's high-speed rail project is famous for being a disaster.
Will be the most expensive project in state history.
A train that's going to nowhere.
Train to nowhere.
All that's there today is this one section, still under construction from Bakersfield to Merced.
So rather than connecting two major cities, it just connects two small towns along the way. They've spent $128 billion. And now even Democrats, even Gavin Newsom is suggesting that he's going to abandon this absolute train wreck, pardon the pun, of a project. And here we have Justin Trudeau just doing the exact same thing out the door. It's so typical of Liberals. They love these big projects. They have no idea how to fund them. They have no idea how to carry them out. All they really care about is that, the contracts go to their friends and that they get some kind of legacy. No, Justin Trudeau, Canadians don't want this. We need to just completely ignore this because I don't think it will ever happen. Okay, folks, I'm going to move on. I want to talk about the story that we broke over at Juno News. This is our friends at True North. Alex Zoltan, who was a guest on the program on Monday, he broke this story that suspects in Canada's largest gold heist are believed to be living freely in India and Dubai. So nearly 2 years after a $20 million gold heist was pulled off at Toronto Pearson's airport, the suspects still remain at large. So recently, CBC's Fifth Estate attempted to track down some of the people who were involved and basically found that they have warrants out for their arrest, but they're not in Canada anymore. They're living in Dubai. Other suspects remain in Canada, but on bail with no trial dates. There's one person that they caught, and they are in the U.S., in U.S. custody, facing charges. There is a total of 9 suspects. We have a picture of them here. These are the suspects who were charged in the spring of 2024. So you basically have a bunch of people who look like they're from the Middle East and India. Not sure if any of them are Canadian citizens or not, but it turns out that a lot of them are just living large and living their lives in other parts of the world. Canada, when it comes to our jail system, our police system, it's a total joke. It's a total joke, a revolving door system. This is one thing that I hope Pierre Poilievre is serious about if he becomes prime minister, cracking down, issuing mandatory minimums, putting people in prison who are repeat offenders, and deporting people who commit crimes who are not Canadians. Okay, folks, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very exciting special show for you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. And we'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you so much. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.